You asked for it, a video about Trump and the Russians from a counterintelligence perspective. Please subscribe to this channel, like the video, and check out my ebook on old intelligence networks in Enlightenment and Communism. Now, I'm a conservative. I've been married for some 15 years. I have 2 kids. I have 3 US-born cousins. You have to understand, real counterintelligence is not some cheap gimmick. You cannot avoid a serious analysis because you hate the Democrats. And if you are a Democrat, you should also be aware that the Russians have always targeted your party as well. It's not about what you want to be true, but what the best possible analysis is. I would strongly prefer somebody else was running for president, not Trump. The Russians certainly wanted to try to recruit him. That's for sure. They will look for the problems the target person has, illegal things he might be involved in, gray area stuff, set traps, offer help. And usually the Russians recruit people by posing as friends or by posing as somebody else. They can false flag recruit someone. At later stages, they might use blackmail techniques. So you have to ask yourself if Trump is putting the American population ahead of himself or if he values himself much more than the American people. At the end of the day, Russia may choose to support him and sabotage his competitors for the simple reason he is divisive, incompetent, and his followers like Russia, because they don't understand Russia, is run by essentially the KGB. Many professionals have commented they see strong indicators of a possible full-fledged narcissistic personality disorder. There have been allegations of the use of Adderall and Sudafed and these kind of substances. So his personality is a huge problem, and that might be the main reason why Russia supports him directly and indirectly. They may just support him and sabotage his competitors without actually running him. So it's confirmed he was a target of Soviet intelligence. Donald Trump's first wife, Ivana, was investigated by FBI counterintelligence in the 1990s over allegations about her connections in her native Czechoslovakia, according to excerpts from her FBI file provided to Bloomberg News. The investigation spanned several countries, with authorities in Canada and Europe depending on the circumstances of her immigration from then communist Czechoslovakia to Austria and later Canada. It is certain that the Czech Secret Service, the STB, was interested in the Trumps. It was a common Eastern Bloc method to relocate agents first to a non-communist European country, then to Canada because of the easier entry requirements at the time, and finally to the USA. If the person leads an inconspicuous life in Europe and Canada, Americans are unlikely to find any useful information later in a background check. In a document from February of 1989, the FBI said it had recommended that a preliminary investigation be initiated into Ivana Trump based on information the FBI had received from a confidential source. Another file from 1990 shows the FBI investigating a man linked to Czechoslovakian intelligence who arranged sham marriages and believed he had a connection to Ivana Trump. Ivana Trump, who died from a fall in her New York home fairly recently, was the mother of Ivanka, Donald Jr., and Eric Trump. After her death, Bloomberg News filed a Freedom of Information Act request with the FBI to obtain all records related to Ivana Trump. The FBI later confirmed it had nearly 900 pages of documents, but said it could take up to 5 years to release them. The FBI has so far released 190 pages and maybe some more in the meantime. Now, this Czech intelligence service, the STB, had been interested in Trump, or has been interested in Trump since 1977. News of the wedding reached the STB office in Zlin, the town in Moravia where Ivana grew up and where her parents live. Ivana's father, Miloš, regularly informed the STB about his daughter's visit from the US and his son-in-law's aspiring career. This is all very common, or was very common in the Eastern Bloc. The STB's work on Donald and Ivana intensified in the late 1980s after Trump announced he was thinking of running for president. Another spy reported in 1977 that Trump's businesses were absolutely safe because they received commissions from the state, or help from the state. The source added another advantage is the personal relationship he has with the American president, that was Jimmy Carter, we presume, and the fact that he's completely exempt from taxes for the next 30 years. In November of 1979, Ivana Trump returned to Czechoslovakia with a 2-year-old son, Donald Jr. Her parents, Miloš and Marie Celnicek, picked her up at Prague airport. The STB discovered that Ivana was no longer a model and was now assisting her husband in his business ventures, designing the interiors of Trump-funded buildings. When Ivana visited in October 1988, Selnicek passed on her tip that George H.W. Bush would win the November presidential election. And that came to pass, and prompting the STB to deepen its activities and attempts to exploit Trump's proximity to the highest echelons of U.S. power. In 1988, another informant working under the codename Milosh reported that Trump was being put under considerable pressure to run for the U.S. presidency. So we don't have all the FBI data, and even if we did have all the FBI files, it wouldn't be enough to really judge that kind of an operation. Now, this is fairly common stuff. This is how the Eastern Bloc played that game. These methods apply to almost anybody of any importance in America. If there's any family connection to Europe, or especially Eastern Europe, business connections, all types of stuff. So this is what you can expect to happen, whether it's a Republican or a Democrat or just a flat-out business person who is not a politician at all. Now, it's not Donald Trump's fault that communist intelligence tried to get into his businesses and into his family. The question is, how successful was Soviet intelligence? And at this point, we don't know exactly about this operation. So then came this counterintelligence chaos. That is a whole nother chapter in all of this. So Trump is no stranger to, or was no stranger to, funky parties, kinky parties. And he also knew the dangers of being secretly filmed. So one of Trump's mentors is very important in all of this, namely Roy Cohn. Now, he's been accused many, many times of being involved in counterintelligence using kinky parties. So you would have these parties, some of them in places that Trump owned or Trump controlled, and then you would look for anything that could be useful for counterintelligence purposes. Now, at the time, Trump was very active in New York, and he wasn't acting, the big conservative guy. On the contrary, he was wild, and his acquaintances were wild. This was just New York, and so these counterintelligence networks that Roy Cohn was attached to, these networks were just chasing politicians and business people to find communists, really, to find people who may have communist sympathies or maybe even communist contacts, especially to foreign countries. This is something that is also not fully clear to us to this day. How much was Donald Trump aware of Roy Cohn's operations? And the big question is, was this counterintelligence program infiltrated by Soviet intelligence? Or was there moles higher up who could give this information that was collected, give this information to the Eastern Bloc? Now, it's all fine and dandy if you, do these kind of counterintelligence ops, but if the information gets compromised, then the whole purpose is defeated, or you may cause more damage compared to not having done, counterintelligence funky parties. So Roy Cohn's father was a politically left-wing judge from New York who had influence in the Democratic Party. Roy was allowed to work on highly sensitive cases of Soviet espionage, such as the theft of nuclear weapons secrets by Julius and Ethel Rosenberg. His interrogation of Ethel's brother David Greenglass was instrumental in Julius Rosenberg being sentenced to death. As a lawyer, he also represented Donald Trump, mafia bosses Anthony Salerno, Carmine Galante, and John Gotti, Studio 54 owners Steve Rubel and Ian Schrager, the Archdiocese of New York, among others. And then, of course, Cohn was an important advisor to Trump. Cohn later worked with Roger Stone, who in turn was instrumental in who played a part in Trump's victory in the presidential elections. So Roger Stone is known as a trickster. He's also kind of kinky, considers himself to be a super mega patriot. Now, if you were involved in these, hairy counterintelligence operations back then, You may have considered yourself to be a great patriot, but, the moles, the traitors, if that information leaks back to the Soviets, then it's a whole big mess. FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover became aware of the 24-year-old Cohn early on, recommended him to communist hunter Senator Joe McCarthy, who then hired Cohn as chief consultant. Cohn gained considerable power under McCarthy on the Senate Permanent Subcommittee on Investigations. These operations may have been infiltrated or betrayed by moles. So this is also something you need to be aware of. So even though Trump may have played a part in all this with the best intentions, hunting the communists, this may have gone off the rails pretty badly. So this is something we need to be aware of. Then, Jeffrey Epstein, Brunel, and the Russians. So the Epstein case is a mess. This man and Ghislaine Maxwell had tried to contact so many important people. And if somebody met them, especially repeatedly, that's interesting but not conclusive. You need to investigate more. So it depends on the time when somebody met Epstein, especially before his first conviction. People are not idiots when they visit this Epstein character, and there's hot young women. So the guests don't necessarily appreciate that because they may fear entrapment, or these guests, they are powerful people themselves. They don't need Epstein to get them, girls or whatever. So it's not that simple. You cannot just say, oh, this guy met Epstein somewhere in the past, that's why person X is guilty. It's not that simple. So then we found out the FBI ran Epstein as some kind of source, maybe even the CIA, as he bragged. Then we had Sigal Mandelker from the Trump administration used him as a source internationally, it appears. So maybe Jeffrey Epstein was part of some counterintel program like Roy Cohn had, but is this program compromised? Ghislaine Maxwell's father, who died under mysterious circumstances, was hailed by the Israelis after his death, but also had British and Russian intelligence contacts. So it's really difficult to determine where the ultimate loyalties were. Counterintelligence programs can get compromised. The Russians always had moles, moles further up the chain, like Robert Hansen at the FBI. So by hunting spies and traitors, you can cause significant damage. And there are different misleading interpretations of the Epstein case. Now, the person who really got Epstein was a real journalist, Julie K. Brown. It was not activists, it was not conspiracy influencers or something like that. The conspiracy guys just quoted stuff over the years that came from real journalists. But somehow the conspiracy influencers make it seem as if they should get the glory. And then there's the mainline interpretation that this was just a Me Too case. Old rich men getting underage girls just for fun. Now it's the new era, and we just say, goodbye to this terrible old era. And this interpretation tries to avoid the intelligence background of this case. Now, then you had Whitney Webb's work. It goes much deeper, but she seems to avoid things that lead to Russian influences in the case. And there's been quite a bit of Russian meddling and Russian influence, but you don't hear that from her for some reason. So then there's the baseline conspiracy interpretation. It was a Jewish operation, they say, but they then defend Trump, even though he had contacts to Epstein and others in those circles, and Trump was always a strong Zionist. So this whole activism doesn't make much sense. Now, obviously, the conspiracy interpretation is very, very faulty because these people usually don't understand intelligence networks in all these countries. They just go to these catch-all phrases, the globalists and whatever, but that's not a professional analysis. Craig Unger, in his book American Compromat, he tells you the story of how Russian intelligence was trying to infiltrate the circles of Jeffrey Epstein and Jean-Luc Brunel. So the Russians obviously wanted to get information on Americans through these people. And at the same time, American intelligence tried to get closer to Russians, just to lure them in. And this is something that may have been a bigger a bigger angle to this whole Trump saga and this Trump career, because by being involved with the Russian businessmen or these intermediate businessmen from former Soviet countries, you're luring them in. They buy a condo in the Trump Tower or something, and you lure them in, and then the American intelligence agencies may try to, make something out of it. That's also something we need to remember in all of this. So then, Trump's overall career. Now, Trump cared about money, status, and women. He was not a politician. He had no credibility with conservatives. His father and some of his friends were members of the John Birch Society, or they were fans of the literature of the John Birch Society. Now the JBS, in case you're not aware of this, the JBS, they claim to be the best anti-communists out there because they used the influence of old baseline conspiracy books. So that was not that good. In the book American Compromat, we learn how, in the final phase of the Cold War, Trump bought hundreds of televisions for the Hyatt Hotel from Joy Lut Electronics, a dealer that supplied the Soviets with multi-standard devices and was most likely under the control of the KGB. The FBI suspected the electronics store in New York, and in particular the manager, Semyon Kislin, and his contacts with the Russian mafia and in the USA. Kislin had donated money to Rudy Giuliani's successful New York mayoral campaigns in 93 and 97. Giuliani was a mayor during the 9/11 attacks. Kislin raised millions more for the ultimately failed attempt to make Giuliani a senator. As a thanks, Kislin received a high position for the city of New York and close access to Trump for the next decades. Then David Bogatin needed an opportunity to launder money from the Russian mafia and bought several apartments in Trump Tower in 1984. Of course, Donald Trump could always insist that he had done legal business, and it's not his job to check these customers so deeply. Trump is not the FBI. However, Trump's mentor, Roy Cohn, as I mentioned, was a fanatical hunter of Soviet agents, and Bogatin should have expected that the condos in Trump Tower could be bugged, because of the FBI and whatever. Then, a certain James Karlstrom from the FBI, he was hunting the Italian mafia, the Russian mafia. He was also friends with Trump since the early 1970s. And according to Karlstrom, Trump has a big heart when it comes to donating to military or law enforcement organizations like the FBI. And the FBI also does counterintelligence, of course. Then these business people Trump was associated with, people like Kislin, Tamir Sapir, anonymous people who bought hundreds of apartments using shell companies. It's estimated to have a volume of up to $1.5 billion. So it's possible that Trump ultimately valued his financial future over his anti-communism, but let's not forget that Deutsche Bank also saved him, and that's a whole nother chapter. In 1985, Trump attended a gala hosted by Armand Hammer, head of Occidental Petroleum, a powerful company that had one foot solidly in the West and another foot solidly in the Soviet Union. Decades earlier, specific families had unofficial back channels to the Soviets, and they could always set up a meeting with important Soviet officials. So having these back channels is not yet total evidence of anything, but interesting enough. So the author of American Compromat, the book, he could as well investigate all these U.S. companies that had Russian business. This is a whole big field. Have to view all of this in context. Now, Trump's presidential campaign was laughed at during the beginning. Even the powerful Council for National Policy, the CNP, had strong reservations, but decided for him. Question is why? The CNP could be compromised. So check out my video on the Council for National Policy. It's a very, very quiet, powerful group, and one of its leaders in the past posed as very conservative, but was gay and had things going on with very young men. So maybe the Russians or the Soviets knew about these things. Maybe they had some influence in the CNP. Because some of these CNP women, especially, they said Trump is going to hurt us. He's going to hurt us with female voters and young voters, so this is not good. Why can't we pick just somebody else? I mean, don't we have enough, politicians we can have as presidential candidates? But some people in the leadership, they flipped and they said, no, it's going to be Trump. And then suddenly all these influencers, even some of the conspiracy influencers, they all said then, Trump is the man. He's going to save America. Then Cambridge Analytica contributed to the miracle with its algorithms, micro-targeting. The conspiracy buffs were mobilized through influencers like Jones. Trump was hailed as the savior. You had the Q cult. And it was basically the old John Birch Society idea that a secret group of right-wingers would save America and arrest the left. And typically pro-Russian people supported Trump for the presidency. Today, you got Tucker Carlson. And Carlson is crazy when it comes to these Russian talking points. So whether it's the pipeline that was blown up here in Europe or anything. I mean, recently he said that he would not support a Donald Trump Nikki Haley ticket because Nikki Haley he doesn't like her and when it comes to the Russian topics. Very, very strange. So then the Deutsche Bank fiasco. Now, Germany has to be regarded as heavily infiltrated by Russian intelligence. At some point, Trump needed money badly, and somehow the Deutsche Bank loaned him a lot. A certain Valentin Bergsmith, informant who worked with U.S. federal authorities to investigate Trump's relationship with Deutsche Bank, was found dead on a high school campus in the El Sereno neighborhood. The loans to Trump were secured or underwritten by the Russian state bank VTB. So in total, the real estate tycoon's liabilities to the Deutsche Bank, the liabilities amounted to around $2 billion. Now, Val Bergsmith acquired specific emails and files on his late father, the Deutsche Bank executive William S. Bergsmith. Val informed the FBI in late 2019 of his knowledge of VTB's audit of Trump's loans or underwriting of Trump's loans. So underwriting is the process by which financial institutions evaluate the ability of potential customers to fulfill their obligations. Val's search for answers motivated him to dig through a cache of over 21,500 emails, other documents from his father's accounts. Val found thousands of emails between his father, Deutsche Bank's chief risk optimization officer, and other executives, as well as attachments containing sensitive documents about Deutsche Bank's financial activities. Now, the VTB bank was at this point 60.9% state-owned by the Russian Federation. Thomas Bowers, a former Deutsche Bank executive, apparently hanged himself in his Malibu home. Mr. Bowers oversaw Trump's private banker and things, these businesses. Then, Rosemary T. Vrablich, managing director of Deutsche Bank, who became Trump's private banker in 2010, after being brokered by her client Jared Kushner, reported directly to Bowers. Vrablich is said to have helped Trump secure loans from her bank. Vrablich sat in the VIP area at Trump's swearing-in ceremony. After Trump's election, Deutsche Bank sought to restructure about $300 million in loan debt, mostly from Vrablich, to avoid potential conflicts of interest. Internal documents from Deutsche Bank included a New York branch of the bank called DBTCA, which had made hundreds of millions of dollars in loans to the companies of Donald J. Trump and several of his family members. The DBTCA was at the center of a money laundering conspiracy. Deutsche Bank laundered $10 billion for Russian customers. So this is all very, very weird. Now, of course, Deutsche Bank is a major institution. So if you get involved with them, you can't blame somebody for being involved with them. And Deutsche Bank, of course, they could claim, well, we're collaborating with the Russian VTB bank, so this is a major bank, what do you expect us to do? So it's not that conclusive, but again, it's very, very interesting. And so ultimately, you should probably choose someone as a political candidate who does not have such a personality as Trump and such a mess of a history. In real literature about the Cold War, you can find many examples of Russia trying to interfere in US elections. Russia was often just supporting US candidates that seemed more conducive to Russian goals. And the Russians always knew that their influence would not necessarily change that much. So Russia may be supporting Trump without running him as an asset. There are many benefits to that strategy. He's incredibly divisive. His followers believe in Russia. He's a caricature of a Western capitalist. He's incapable of working with others. He's kind of isolating America. He's pushing away other countries. And his followers believe virtually any conspiracy hypothesis that is put forward. And of course, the Russians have long since infiltrated the conspiracy activist movement. So this is something you would find in a, this is sort of an assessment you could find in, some government intelligence agencies somewhere around the world. They don't have access to all the documents. They don't necessarily have the perfect sources in Russia who would tell them secrets. But you don't have to be 100%. You don't have to 100% know whether or not Trump was recruited at some point by Eastern intelligence. You don't have to know 100%. You just know enough at this point that you should not take the risk with Trump. You should just pick somebody else and just have some other candidate that is that doesn't have such a chaotic life and such a chaotic personality, such a chaotic past. And it's interesting to see that these pro-Russian influencers, conspiracy guys, Tucker Carlson, all of these guys, it's interesting to see that they're so crazy about Trump because of the Russian issue, because they expect him to be soft on the Russians. And these influencers are willing to cause friction, heavy friction, inside the Republican Party and inside conservative circles in America. So this Russian thing seems so important to them, they're willing to cause trouble for conservatives over this topic. Now ask yourself, is that really worth it? It's one thing to blast the Democrats and to blast all the leftists in the country, and to use all these silly conspiracy hypotheses that are being thrown around. But this method can be applied as well, within conservative circles. Just this witch hunty kind of these methods. Anybody who's not pro-Trump is regarded a traitor. Anybody who's not pro-Russia is regarded as a traitor and terrible. So you have to be aware of that. So all this damage that is being done, all this damage is in the interests of the Russians. Please like this video, subscribe to this channel if you haven't already done so. Leave a comment below, share this on social media, and check out my ebook on old intelligence networks in Enlightenment and Communism.